Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Charlene Chen, and I am one of the three co-founders of Operations Nation, along with Astrid and Ashrina. And I want to give a special shout out to our colleague, Becca, who did so much of the behind the scenes organizing of this great event. And many of you may know her from our wonderful Operations Nation community. So we're going to have a very exciting hour. So the theme is New Year, New Ops, and we couldn't think of a better way or a sexier way to kick off the year than with a conversation with Jen Bergren. She's someone that we originally came across as a potential speaker for our conference, but unfortunately she had a conflict, and you'll hear about some of the work that she's been doing at HubSpot. If you just joined us, not too late, we're just getting started. So we're going to kick off, and just to do a bit of housekeeping and let those of you who have not attended a conversation before know, essentially we focus these conversations on more of a fireside chat style. It's meant to be interactive in the chat function. So don't sit back and just say, oh, I'm just listening. We definitely want to encourage chat messages. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. And I will be facilitating the conversation with Jen. And just wanted to mention before I forget, for those of you who aren't familiar with Operations Nation, we are a community-led ecosystem of chief operating officers, operation managers, heads of ops all over the globe. We cover at least 30 countries, and our goal and mission is to empower operations professionals and startups and scale-ups across the globe. So everything we do, including this conversation, is really about sharing information, sharing resources, and equipping you to do the best jobs you can in your respective ops careers. So without further ado, I'd like to kick it off. And the way that we like to kick off our conversations is really getting to know our esteemed speakers. So I'd like to introduce you, Jen. We're so excited to have you here. Could you kick us off by telling us, how did you get to where you are today? What's been your journey? We'd love to hear how you got into ops. Was it accidental, intentional?
This is a great question. First, I want to thank you for having me here today. I hope I can provide some helpful information for my fellow ops people. But I am one of those people who wish they knew what ops was. Earlier in my career, I fell into it like a lot of people do. My first career was in graphic design for print work, including a daily newspaper, a weekly magazine. It was fast-paced, high-volume work with tight, non-negotiable deadlines because things actually need to be mailed, not SaaS subscriptions, but actual mailed subscriptions. There's a lot of using templates and creating approval processes, a lot of project management, tools, tech efficiencies, streamlining, problem solving. Looking back on it, a lot of ops work for somebody with an art degree, but I really thrived in those areas of the job. They like getting things done on time and on budget. So while I was working on those design jobs, I was also directing photo shoots, and I got interested in photography. Long story short, my second career was photography as a business owner, so a photography art business. I learned a lot about setting up a business, everything about business, because it was my own business. I was doing all the roles. Everything had to be efficient because everything was my responsibility. So creating and documenting processes that I used in my own business. My favorite part of that job was learning about business and marketing. So a few years later, I went back to school to get an MBA because I wanted to build more foundational business knowledge about businesses that were bigger than maybe one person. I thought that might help. I thought my third career would be marketing, but after school, I started working for an agency, which was called Chief MarTech Officer, which is now called Remotish. They still do HubSpot technical work and RevOps and WebOps. I joined during the second month in business, so I was able to help build the business as it grew and build the operations foundation of the agency through a variety of the job titles I held. First client facing, then client services manager, then operations manager. At about 2 years in, we split off operations into its own department. That operations manager role I just mentioned, giving me that official ops title. All the ops were mine. Ops at an ops agency. So a lot of ops. By that point, I had learned what ops was. And at the end of this last October, the 2022, I left that job to pursue instructional design and other educational content creation, inspired by that work I did at Remotish, where I created an onboarding program and built this knowledge base. I want to build content to help people, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but I think a common thread in all those careers was that ops mindset related to repeatable processes, efficiency, problem solving, documentation, being super curious, wanting to know how everything works and fits together. But I didn't originally know those things could be a career path on its own until recently.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for the intro, Jen. And you've had such a wide variety of experiences. And as I think Becca said, so many of us in the audience have squiggly paths. I don't think anyone really grows up saying, oh, I want to be an operations or I want to be a COO. So thanks for sharing how you got to where you are today. So moving on to what you're doing now, it'd be great to hear, you describe yourself as an operations educator. What does that mean to you and why is it important?
Yeah, so operations educator, the best title I've been able to come up with at the moment to best describe what I am doing right now, which involves helping educate operations professionals, since courses and other content about our work is so hard to find. Thank you for what Operations Nation is doing to help with that as well. But classes that are not just about like supply chain management as operations, which is important, but not exactly relevant to what all of us are doing. I also want to help give operations professionals more skills and knowledge to be successful so they can advance their careers, as well as educating the public about what operations is, elevating it as a profession to get more respect and understanding, helping people pursue operations with more intention maybe than those like myself who kind of fell into it in their career. Maybe people can learn about it sooner and pursue it more intentionally and be more successful sooner. And I have one more point, is teaching non-ops people operation skills or tactics that they can also use to succeed in any role, such as documentation, useful skills for anyone in so many kinds of careers. I actually haven't seen a lot of education on these topics. I know Operations Nation has a new program as well, which is super exciting, but there seems to be a need for this kind of education. So I think that relates to a mission that we both share.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and I love that. I promise that we didn't pay Jen to tee that up, but for those of you who are wondering, we're also moving into doing courses. So maybe some of you on this very call are going to be participating in our first cohort of an aspiring and first time COO course, which kicks off in about 10 days. But back to you, Jen. Before we dive deep into documentation, would love to hear, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned during your ops career? Some of these may be connected to the topic, but they don't have to be.
Okay, so biggest lessons I've learned in my career. I think always be learning is a great lesson, no matter what the job is. Seek to learn more about it. Another good lesson is working at startups and or starting your own business is a great way to learn a lot really quickly. Like I recommend people do both of those things at least once in their career, especially people in operations, since we usually need to know like a broad knowledge of how the whole business works. Related to that, another lesson would be like the biggest companies with recognizable names are not always the best to work for, because at smaller companies, you can learn more and sometimes advance more quickly. A big lesson is remember, you're working with people. Don't expect them to act like machines. So for a lot of my work, that means providing different formats of communication to accommodate different learning styles like visual, text, audio. It's not realistic to expect people to remember something that they heard or saw only one time. You'll need to constantly repeat yourself to get people to take action and remember your message. As the person doing the communicating, you might get annoyed at saying the same thing all the time. But about the time where you're starting to get annoyed is maybe about the time people start to pick up on that message, similar to marketing. Another important, I think, career lesson I learned is doing a great job probably won't get you a promotion just by itself. You also have to advocate for yourself, which is sort of where documentation for your career can come in. So writing down your successes and communicating those successes. Don't expect someone else to keep track of that for you. My last lesson is related to documentation about leaving jobs on a positive note when possible, such as leaving documentation so they are able to hire and train and enable others. One example of this is even early in my career, there were times where I was the first person hired in a new role. So like my role was created to help relieve the workload of my boss. And when I left, I didn't want all that work to just go back to my boss. I wanted to be helpful. So always be helping. That's kind of one of my messages I like to remember.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. Oh, so many great lessons learned, many of which resonate with me, and I'm sure resonate with our audience, particularly, I think, from the recency, we are ops people because we're problem solvers and we love helping other people. But I also want to address something that you said in the more in the beginning of your lessons learned, which is advocating for yourself. So one of the most important things that we advocate for as Operations Nation is the celebration of ops heroes like yourself. Because I find that many of us are working behind the scenes and doing things in our startups, but often like people don't really get what we do as ops people. So it is important to learn how to advocate, and part of that can be documentation of the processes that we've implemented. And if heaven forbid we get hit by a London bus, people quickly learn that our absence is dreadfully, dreadfully missed. Okay, so let's kick it off. Let's dive deep into the oh so sexy topic of documentation. So I know obviously many of our audience members are probably already documenters themselves, but just to set the stage, how do you define documentation? What makes documentation good, and why is it important to a company? So I know it's a multifaceted, but just why do we care about documentation?
So what is documentation? It was always hard to find a good definition. I tried to make one, which is documentation is recording who, what, where, when, why, and how to do everything in your company or in your role. And also storing that information where other people can find it and use it. Basically, documentation, any recorded information that is not only located in somebody's head. If you need to have a meeting in order to get access to that information, that's probably not documented. So it can sometimes be referred to as standard operating procedures or process mapping or business handbooks or manuals. I know this audience here probably knows a lot of other terms for it. But sometimes those words of process or procedures can be intimidating to maybe non-ops people. So I try to explain it and make it more accessible or relatable, because as I think our mutual hero, Brene Brown says, clear is kind. I want to be clear. So documentation is content, helpful content. It's knowledge sharing. It's eliminating knowledge gaps and knowledge silos, and then saving that documentation where people know where to find it, and communicating about it is knowledge distribution, maybe knowledge management, helping people find and use the helpful content. I think your second question is what makes good documentation? Process and systems. Is that right, Charlene?
Yes. What makes good, right? We all know we need to document, but like, how do you define good enough?
It's a good question. I think the definition of a good documentation system is one people use and keep updated, one that helps or enables people to be successful in their roles and helps the company be more successful, because helping the people will help the company. I think some aspects of good documentation processes and systems include a common theme that I think we already talked about, that you're not just dealing with the documents, you're dealing with human behavior. For any kind of system, people are always going to be the main component. So you want to have clear owners of information, who is responsible for what, clear responsibilities about when to update or when to create new documentation, a clear organization of the documentation itself so people can find it, both like the storage of it and then the documentation formatting in the articles themselves. You want to have reminders about updating that are automated or recurring tasks to get in front of people. Like, don't make them remember to do it. Don't make it hard. You want to have frequent communication about new and updated documentation in several different channels in several ways. And you want to be teaching people about creating or editing documentation since their first days when onboarding in the company. Build it into your onboarding program. I think the last part of your question is about how does documentation help companies?
Yeah, why does it matter, right? I think you alluded a little bit to this, like from onboarding, which is, I think, is a great use case, but like, why else should we, quote unquote, give a crap? Excuse my French. Well, sorry. Why should ops people care? And then why should not the people we work with care about it?
So the company benefits, not just the individual benefits, but from the company level, it is making sure that knowledge doesn't leave the company when people leave, so other people can learn from that past and present teammates' efforts, and it can help lead to efficiency, which I know is a big thing that ops is responsible for at many companies. So for example, my last company I worked with, because we had all this documentation along with some other factors, we were able to offer 30-hour work weeks as a benefit because of this efficiency that we've created, which that benefit in itself helps retain and attract talent, offering less work, less stress of the current team. Everybody's enabled to do their work. We just talked about onboarding. You can onboard new employees more quickly. You can increase their productivity faster, which could increase revenue faster. And you can easily see on, agree, and improve your processes, because process improvement, again, big for ops teams members' responsibilities. And it also, documentation also allows you to iterate and experiment more efficiently. So these are all benefits I saw at my last role at Remotish, because we documented so much from day one. I was able to create that onboarding program in our year 3. And we doubled the company quickly from 10 to 20 people in 6 months. And they said they felt supported because they had access to this documentation about how things worked. They didn't have to wait. They didn't have the burden of figuring things out for themselves or untangling messes themselves right when they started the job. They didn't have to wait to ask someone because they could go find a lot of the answers themselves. That was super important because we were remote and flex time, so there might not always be people working at the same time. And we would not have been able to offer that 30-hour work week benefit. Definitely would not have been able to do that without having the processes documented. So people could take time off and other people could easily fill in for those people and be cross-trained on their job.
Awesome. So just playing back, it sounds like a lot of the benefits were particularly because you had a remote first workplace, and it was really critical in making sure that, there was good baton passing. And so not just a good onboarding, but the actual day-to-day sharing of and coordination of work. We definitely need to take some tips from you. We're a mostly remote organization ourselves, and need some tips on how to do async collaboration. So I'd love to hear, so in our conversations in the past, one of the things we've found helpful is not just like best practices and sort of the benefits of doing something, but like, I think scare tactics are also very powerful. Like, what goes wrong? Like, why is documentation important? Can you share any examples of times when things have gone very badly in an organization you've worked with or, consulted for? Like, okay, when Jen's around, there's great documentation, but what happens when there's not documentation?
Well, hopefully you set up a system like I'm going to talk about a little later on today that will work even without you being there. But I think a small example is at some point the company will grow too much for managers to be able to train new people and answer their team's questions. There'll just be too many people to answer those questions all the time in real time. The team's going to be too large. And or your first hire will leave and there's no documentation, and we'll have a big lesson learned because the new people that you hire for like being the second person in that role are going to really take a long time to ramp up to speed because the first person's efforts were not documented. And I don't have a personal example to give, I'm sorry, but with the current state of a lot of people leaving for various reasons, leaving companies, you may constantly be in a, I would say, training debt or knowledge debt and never get to full productivity. Your current team might burn out because they're training new people all the time instead of having time to get their own work done. I read an article about this recently, and you might not ever reach the point of scale if you don't have documentation. So that might be a scare tactic if we're talking about scare tactics.
Great. Well, no worries. I mean, I can share personally. I saw, I won't mention which one, but one of the startups that I've worked with just had really high turnover for some uncontrolled extrinsic reasons, some intrinsic reasons. And I think it was really frustrating for all employees who, especially for the ones who had been there for a long time, because they felt they were constantly spending all of their precious time retraining new employees. And it just felt like we were all trying to move towards a particular objective or mission or OKR. And it was like feeling like we're starting from scratch. So it was super inefficient to get people up to scale, up to snuff. And then like just to get to the baseline, and much less like creating new stuff. So just to get people to baseline knowledge was really difficult. And I'm seeing some great comments in here. There's some good questions. So we will definitely move on quickly to more of the application stuff and stop being so theoretical. Yeah, but let's do one more question just to set the stage, and then let's move into like tactically, like not just how, and you're going to show an example template for documentation, but we're going to get into the, like how you deal with the challenges. Like, so there's one question about how time consuming documentation is. And then also like the, you know, it's big, it takes a lot of time, it needs updating. So like, how do you get people motivated? Oh, and then it didn't take long. We've got the favorite tools. So stay tuned, folks. So yeah, we're going to start with the who, like who's responsible for this. So before we get into the what, like, can you just talk about like whose accountability / responsibility is it? Is it the only ops person? If there's multiple ops people, like how do you decide? Is it, you know, delegated by team? Like who's responsible for both setting up the system and then holding people accountable for making sure that documentation continues?
Yeah, so I have a really long answer because this is a big part of the system that you're going to set up is involving other people. But at the 20 to 100 person companies that a lot of our audience here today may be working at, the responsibility for getting it started, for setting up the system, for overseeing it all. Ops is usually a good choice because of our skill set and because our work is horizontally cross-functional across the whole business, so we can see it all. But one of the keys to making sure documentation is kept up to date is not having all the documentation responsibilities for the whole company on one person or one team forever. So even if ops is responsible for making sure the work happens overall, or after ops has created the system to make it easy for other people to get involved and get the work done, it's time to divide up those responsibilities of creating, editing, and improving documentation among the teams who hold the knowledge. I usually call this setting up roles. So the different ways people may be involved in documentation includes the users using documentation. That's probably your biggest group. The subject matter experts who you maybe you are interviewing to get the information to create the documentation. Other creators, editors, approvers, and eventually you can empower teams with owners of certain categories of knowledge that they will be responsible for keeping up to date. And maybe they're not keeping it up to date themselves, but they're checking other people's work. This is definitely a journey to get all of these roles into place, starting with yourself and then users, because users are usually the biggest hurdle, getting people to actually use the documentation. Don't try to put all these roles in at once. I have some advice here to suggest an order of which to put those roles into place. And all of these roles are actually like the phase 2 of setting up your documentation system, but I'm going to cover it now because it's relevant to responsibilities. So first, users. You'll want to have beta testers of the documentation to make sure the format and the system is useful. You'll make adjustments and you'll expand to other teams as users. You'll want to then have subject matter experts. I know as an ops person, you probably have at least broad knowledge of many, many parts of how the business works, but maybe you don't know exactly every detail of every process enough to write instructions on how to do it. So interviewing the subject matter experts to get that information so you can write the documentation. Maybe even if you do know everything about how to do every process, getting other people involved in documentation and the creation makes them more likely to adopt it and use it. If you're not just like handing them the documentation saying, use this, if they actually feel like they were involved in creating it. I have an example of subject matter experts. In my last role, my CEO needed to document some of her work so she could delegate some of it to me. And so we could give it to some of the new roles we were creating, but she was busy. She's the CEO. And I wasn't able to write it myself because I wasn't doing that work yet. So I would book a call with her and record it and have her walk through the process. And I would ask questions and have her talk through it. And then I would make the first draft and I would send it back to her to edit. And then we'd have somebody test it to make sure it was useful. So that is subject matter experts. Next, you will want to get creators and editors involved after you've got some user adoption figured out. You will want to create a document about how to create documentation and how to maintain documentation and help give those responsibilities to creators and editors. You will need to make sure that you document those people's roles in that maintenance document. So if somebody has a question about a document, they know who to ask it about. If by this point you haven't divided your documentation up by team, like sales documentation, marketing documentation, this is a good point to do that. So you can further shift the responsibility to the teams. And though you may still need one category that's like company-wide knowledge that applies to everyone that you as ops may be responsible for, in addition to like operations, processes, documentation. So we're about halfway through the roles. I know this is super long, but next you want to have approvers. After you have creators and editors at least started, you're going to want to designate team leaders to be the approvers. Since again, you may not have the detailed knowledge of like the preparation process for a sales discovery call. So you'll want to have your sales team leader making sure that is indeed the process they want people to follow to approve that documentation and any changes. And another example of approval that you could use at Remotish, I had 2 levels of approvers. The team leader for like the content, the subject matter accuracy, or the process accuracy, and then me, ops, making sure the formatting is correct. The links are working, there's enough links, there's clear language, everything is standardized, everything's consistent. You're welcome to use that as an approval model if you still want to have that overseeing on ops. Finally, once all of that is running fairly well, you can start to assign knowledge owners for those certain categories of knowledge. And what do I mean by categories of knowledge? Such as, I know this is an agency example, but maybe one person is the knowledge owner and responsible for making sure there is enough documentation and the documentation is up to date for like a smaller subcategory of work, like how do we service retainer clients? And then a different person is how do we service project clients? And that services team manager would be kind of overseeing on top, but maybe not creating anything themselves to make sure everything that they need to enable their team is there and accurate. And that is a lot of information, but it's also the bulk of that phase 2 of setting up a system for documentation. So I thought I'd cover it now. Part 1 is setting it up for yourself.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. This is bringing back flashbacks of my IT consulting days and of the process, procedure, SOPs. Yeah, so just to kind of take a step back and maybe just to nudge a bit, one of the questions from our audience was about like, just even for those ops people who love documentation, this is a lot. Like, so can we just put that out there? This sounds almost like a full-time job. So maybe moving into the next section where I think you're going to share an example of like a best practice for template. Like, how can those of us who are in smaller companies, like just start with the basics, like, and kind of ratchet it up? To me, that sounds like almost best practice, like, at its best, but like, how do you just get started? And yeah, I don't know if you want to, now's a good time to screen share the template, but yeah, like, how do we just start?
Just starting. So my top advice to starting is start small, start with yourself.
Yeah.
I did want to cover a tiny bit about, I know this talk is about building a documentation system. I wanted to talk about very briefly what I mean by system as a set of things working together as part of an interconnecting network, or a set of principles and procedures according to which something is done, a framework. I don't mean like use Guru, use Catalog, use Notion, or use a specific tool. By system, I mean the people and process working together, that part of a system, because if you skip the people and process system setup and go directly to choosing a tool, and expecting the tool to work miracles all by itself, you may probably be likely to fail if you don't already have these good habits that we're going to talk about in the culture of documentation. I mean, it would be nice if the tool did all that work for you. Just buy it and magically it's all created and you have a whole knowledge base and everything's updated all the time. But we have to remember we're working with humans and human behavior. So it's not super realistic, but again, back to human behavior, we have to help get things started, overcome the overwhelm by starting small and starting by setting up your system for yourself so you can test it before you expand it to all those other roles that we talked about, because that can be overwhelming. So starting small, starting with yourself, making sure you personally can continue to create, use, and update the documentation. This also will help you set a good example. When you start to involve other people, because they will have someone to model the behavior on, they can trust the documentation is up to date. They'll be able to see the proven benefits by seeing the benefits from your tests for yourself. So starting your, I'm going to call it a system, starting your system with reserving time, making time to use and improve documentation. This is the small first step. So making time for it. Maybe you're blocking your calendar and having maybe an email or a pop-up notification to actually push you to do it. Maybe you have project management, recurring tasks with some kind of other notification built in, because those reminders are often needed to help get started. When you've got your time reserved and reminders, you want to get specific about what you're going to work on during those time blocks in advance, or you're going to be overwhelmed again. The time will come up, documentation time, and here it is. And then you're like, spend the whole hour trying to figure out what to start. So I would suggest the 3 things to have for your project management system for documentation is current tasks, like top priority, documentation to either improve or build, and a wish list where you put your ideas of nice to have documentation, but not things you can focus on right now, but you'll have a recorded list, a documented list, and then quarterly reviews or updates. These are recurring tasks for that set aside time for you to go through like entire categories once you've had it created. So then you can make sure the edits were made that were not made in real time and everything's standardized, or you can take that time to identify other documentation or bigger improvements. Next, we're getting into the template. So the next step would be the setting up the template for documentation and the naming conventions, because when you're testing out this template and making your version 1.0 of your documentation, when you're just starting, this is why I recommend writing your own tasks and processes for the first pieces of documentation, so you can test the project management, the time management, and the template yourself. And let's see if I can show the template. How are my Zoom skills today?
Great, thanks, Jen. And while you're doing that, I think Marta had a great comment too, which is like how to make time, right? So I think it was like chunking it out and making like a weekly or a, you know, have a drum beat. And you said that too, Jen. If you don't make time for documentation, like urgent will definitely eat important for breakfast.
Yes.
Over and over and over again. In fact, it will eat it for breakfast every day. Okay, great. Back to you.
Yes. That's why it seems like, why am I talking about time management in documentation? Because that is the biggest hurdle to get over, is making time for it, because it doesn't seem urgent unless like you need to train someone tomorrow because you're going on vacation, and then you're not going to be able to do it all in one day. So, so getting all of the time management part set up is a big part of the system. All right, is it showing my screen where it says article title?
Mhm.
All right, so
You're good.
this is a template I made starting at my last job and then improving on it as I did all the research to make my class. It's only a Google Doc because that was easy to share. But I recommend having, you know, a title at the top and naming convention. One that I usually recommend is either a question format, because that is how people often search, like how to do something, or what is something, what is our marketing process. That's probably too big for one piece of documentation, but you get the idea. This part is actually like a table of contents. So if you're worried about your document being too long, people can come in here and just click on something and it will take them down. A lot of the wikis, I have another example down here we're going to go through, but a lot of the wiki tools have that same anchor link feature. So that will help it be less overwhelming. If you have this table of contents area, it's helpful to have last updated, who updated owner, so you know who to ask for questions, so you can trust it's up to date. Again, your system might do that work for you, but if not, have it in your document. If somebody gets confused about the names of processes, like we have a bunch of different things called onboarding, onboarding products, onboarding clients, onboarding employees, you might want to have a little explanation here, like, oh, if you're looking for this other document, go over here and then add a link. Interlinking different articles is a big part of having a successful system to help people find the information they need. I recommend having a history or context section. Again, people can skip it by using that table of contents at the top, but you'll want to add relevant information for people to give them the context they need, like why are they doing this, what they should understand, what have we tried before, and then the process steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, what they're going to be doing. Make sure you break it out into bullets so it's not overwhelming, so it's easy to skim, using headings, using subheadings. If there is a process that occurs immediately before or after, put those links at the top or bottom so people can continue on their journey of learning to what they need to do next. And then related articles or resources at the bottom to, again, help people find the information they need. Your tool might automatically do this using tags or other fancy things, but if not, you can just put them here. And here is an example I modified from another document about how to run a kickoff call. We have these links. I can show you this is a little better here. So there was history, context, and then these steps broken down into visually these pieces so it's less overwhelming for people. Trying to make it clear, clear is kind. I do recommend adding visuals because this is a document about a call. That's a little hard, but I did add one for an example. And then there would be a lot of links through here because this is what because this was my example. I don't have live links, but I wrote a little note about links. Hopefully that is at least somewhat helpful. Again, the exact format and template is going to depend on your company's needs, but this was I thought a good general starting point for testing your documentation and make sure it's useful for you and your team.
Awesome, Jen. Some folks are asking whether this is an open source template or is this proprietary Jen Bergren trademark?
I will have to think about that. Right now, this is available with my class, but
Okay.
I'm gonna write that
Oh,
down.
okay. Okay, plug for Jen's class. But yes, for those of you who are wondering, we are recording this and we'll share the recording afterwards,
Yes.
as mentioned. But yeah, Operations Nation is all about templates and not recreating the wheel. Also invite those of you who have documentation templates that you love to use. Please, if you feel inclined, share them either here or in the community Slack.
Yes, I would love to see more templates.
Awesome. Okay, conscious of time, I'd like to move on to a couple things. So I want to address, a lot of people talked about maintenance. So like there's a big, emphasis like push to get the documentation out there. What about this whole maintenance thing? And then can you also start, talking about like the change management aspect? So like, how do you get people to actually like read the documentation? And then like, how do you inculcate a culture of like continuous improvement of the documentation? And like, because I feel like every project that an ops person does, like there's excitement and yay around the beginning, and then it's like enthusiasm for the novel, once the enthusiasm drops off when the novelty wears off.
Yes, great questions. I'm going to tie it into that next point of setting up your system, because it does tie to a lot of those things. This is the thing that is often forgotten or maybe not thought about, is setting up your communication cadence, your channels, your tools for communicating about that new or improved documentation or documentation needs. So you'll want to have maybe one tool such as Slack. Maybe you have a Slack channel to start with about just documentation, so it doesn't get lost, so it seems important. So it's more likely to be used. Or maybe there's a regular item about documents or processes in a team meeting agenda, or you have a section of an internal newsletter about documentation, but making sure it gets in front of people numerous times will help people remember not only to use it, like we were just talking about, but to make those updates. I again recommend starting with one channel and then expanding to others so it's not overwhelming. And can you remind me of the other parts of your questions?
Apologies. I love asking multi-layered questions. Yeah, so the first one was, how do you basically make sure that these documents get maintained or not forgotten about, which I think you've answered. And then it's kind of related, which is just like, how do you deal with sticklers, and like, how do you get people who don't want to change to change?
One note about that for change management is when you are starting to involve other people in your documentation system as either users or the other roles we talked about, think about rebranding documentation as knowledge sharing or enablement. So the team members can think about creating documentation as preventing their team members from repeating the same mistakes or repeating the research they already did, helping people, helping their team, but not thinking or positioning documentation as like compliance, like, oh, you're gonna get fired if you don't do it, if you don't follow this or do it this way. Ruling with fear is gonna make your culture toxic. That's not a great idea. But other change management was the question for additional.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess this whole thing, and I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of the ops leaders in the audience. Like sometimes ops is not just about how you do, like the hard skills of what you do, but it's all about your EQ and your ability to communicate, as you said, to the rest of your business and influence. And like, you might not be explicitly on the sales team, but you are always selling. You are selling the documentation process. You are selling this change and why. So I think you've already answered this question. It sounds like sticks is not the good approach. So are there carrots? Like, can we give, documentation, most valuable documenter awards? Like,
Yes.
And this is for audience too in the chat. Like, have you been able to like award people or recognize people for great documentation so that it becomes like a cool, hip thing to do?
Yes, so in the reinforcing the change step of the change process, make sure it's positive reinforcement, like maybe, like featuring a wiki or documentation article of the week on any of these communication channels that we just mentioned, or even publicly on LinkedIn saying, hey, my team member created this great article. they're doing a great job. You could also, something we did at my last company is build documentation into people's roles and make this knowledge owner that we talked about, this knowledge owner role is like a step in between their current role and their next role. So it's like a promotion to give them that responsibility of being the owner of this knowledge. So that would be another reward.
Interesting. I love that. It's like we promote people without giving, the management training, but you should also add, like, you can't get promoted unless you're a great documenter either. Actually, that's really powerful. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it is related to training people. So, and being an expert in that area of knowledge. So,
right. Yeah, I think I've seen some core competency and skills matrices that incorporate that, like, it's not just being the subject matter expert, but like to get to the next level, it's your ability to pass that knowledge and expertise on to others. And I feel like documentation would be a really important lever for that. Okay, cool. I'm going to take a pause. I know we're down to our last 10 minutes, but before we wrap up, I want to just skim through some of the questions that we may not have covered. I think we've covered most of the like classic maintenance, heavy lifting, who's responsible, dealing with prickly colleagues who don't want to make time for it. There was one thing I wanted to okay, this is maybe a little bit left field, and I know you showed a Word document, but our ops community absolutely loves geeking out and debating tools. So I'm not asking you to advocate and say like which tool is best. Can you just, like, without advocating for specific tools, can you just talk about like what are some of the key differences between systems, like in an agnostic sense of like what are the pros and cons of different tools, and like could you give some sort of logical reasoning? So like if your startup is small and scrappy, then you want to look for a system that's like this. If you're complex and scaling up, could you just, like, without necessarily like I'm going to say we use Notion and Operations Nation, but like not advocating, just what are the pros and cons of different tools? And an audience, feel free to like advocate and say what you like in the chat, but I'm not forcing Jen to endorse.
So exact pros and cons of specific tools might be a better conversation for the community, but my recommendations on documentation, storage, and organization tools is for your first stage, when you're just creating your version 1.0 documentation for yourself to try to get that whole system set up, or as part of your system, when you're documenting your own tasks or processes, I say use the tool easiest for you, because building all those habits and routines is going to be difficult. So don't make it more difficult on yourself by learning a new tool at the same time, or don't distract yourself by doing all this tool research before you even write your first piece of documentation. Definitely get the habit of writing and editing and updating first for yourself. But when you're ready to expand your system to include those other people, my number one tip is to use a system your team is already using daily, so you don't have to teach them a new tool in addition to teaching them all these new habits about creating and using and updating. Tool adoption is difficult. Many of you probably already know this from working in ops, but you may want to consider what is your team's current home base for their work. Sorry if that's like the baseball America analogy. I couldn't think of a better one. But where does your team spend most of their day? Maybe Slack or a project management system might be a common answer. It's going to be different for every company, which is why it's hard to give advice about specific tools. But can you use that commonly used tool for documentation storage, or can you integrate into that tool such as Slack, so people can access that documentation in the same place where they're already working, where they're already spending most of their time, so they don't have to switch to a different tool or learn to use a different tool to build that habit of using and creating and updating documentation.
Okay, great. Good punt. Very diplomatic. And for what it's worth, Becca reminded me that there will be a community roundtable, which is continuing the conversation around documentation best practices. And I think that will be a place where people can have a great debate about the different tools.
Yes.
Look at the chat. Some people have made some. There's a great question, which I think I will make the last question before we kind of do the main takeaways and rapid fire questions to wrap up. So one was about overhaul. So in the example where a company has legacy documentation, but you're trying to like kind of upgrade it or improve it because the old system or documentation is outdated. Do you have any advice for like how you break up that process or that project so you break as little as possible along the journey?
Yeah, so first, congrats on having an existing system. An existing system that's rare in general, maybe not rare here because we're all ops people, but improving that existing system is going to depend on what exactly you need to improve, like what is not working, and identifying that. So doing user research to ask people why they're not using it, if that's the reason why you're going to improve it. And another common answer of improvement would be like the information's outdated, so they can't trust it, or the documentation is not written clearly, they can't find what they need. There are a lot of potential issues. So my advice is don't guess, do the research, do the needs analysis, find the root cause of the problem with the system that you need to improve. And doing that research will also help your change management because it gets people involved. Asking people about like why they're not using or why the documentation system needs to be improved will help make them aware that, hey, maybe changes and improvements are coming, and make them more likely to adopt those changes because they'll feel involved in that process. You'll also want to do an audit of the existing state of your documentation. For example, what is outdated? Does it only need minor updates? Does each piece need a complete overhaul? Does it need to be archived? What needs to be added? What types of documentation are missing? Are there categories? Do the categories need to be redone? This happened a lot at my last company because the company was growing. So we were making like new departments and I had to reorganize all the categories to make the new departments, like pull things out of regular apps and put them into people apps. For categories, on an individual level for the audit, does your documentation structure and template need to change? Does the naming convention need to change? Is that what needs to be improved? Audit your communication processes that we just talked about. Do you have communication processes in place for new and updated documentation? Are people using them? Is it clear what people should do? Again, people's favorite topic of the tool, audit your documentation storage tool. Is it the reason why people are not using documentation? But again, don't jump right to this and think that you solve the problem if you replace the tool when you haven't addressed the behaviors. And then audit your roles if you have roles set up, or set up roles to help spread the responsibility of documentation. After your user research and audit, you'll determine the changes that are needed and prioritize them. And my big tip here is don't prioritize by yourself in a silo. Involve those other managers of other teams in your prioritizing. Again, to help them feel involved and maybe make them more likely to help with your documentation, at least like the overseeing, the approval level, maybe the knowledge owner level. Because if you were the only person that was doing the documenting and you were responsible for everything, maybe that is why the system made it improving, because ops people have a lot of work to do. We wear a lot of hats. Being chief documentation officer can't be your full-time job. That might be why it needs to be improved. And then you'll go into your change management as you start making those changes.
Great. Oh, so many pearls of wisdom. So before I ask you what resources you recommend, some of the things I've heard from you are, start with yourself, start simple, even if it's just a Word document. Bring people along with you, help them understand what the importance of it is to themselves as individuals and why it's important for the company. And then like continuously communicate and bring people along for the journey as you're going through the so joyful change management. So thank you for sharing that. Lastly, what are conversations, and just to set expectations or re-clarify expectations for folks. Our conversation events are not meant to just like turn you into an ops expert overnight or in an hour.
In 1
These are
hour.
purposely meant to be like high level, cursory, whet your appetite, get you thinking about like what you're doing right already and some areas that you might want to work on. So for those people who want to dig deeper, what are some resources you recommend for those who want to go deeper?
All right, so I think we've mentioned I have a documentation class that goes deeper into each of these topics. I think that'll be in the follow-up email maybe, or you can find it in the community. Eventually I'll have a resources page or a guide on my upcoming website to help with more resources because they can be hard to find, as we've mentioned before. One person I would recommend following, her name is Alicia Butler-Pierre. She talks about business infrastructure, which is very similar to all of this ops setup, super interesting. And the community, I've seen some great conversations in the Operations Nation community, like from Riley McGee recently, finished his operations handbook. It's not operations handbook, but entire documentation handbook. So that's super exciting. So I know there are other experts in the community doing great work in documentation. I would love to refer people to them. Maybe we could start a conversation about that in the community. Maybe I'll talk to Becca, the amazing Becca, after this call about that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And yeah, if anyone from the audience has other recommendations, please do share. As Jen said, our community is all about knowledge sharing. And so, why recreate the wheel? Okay, in our last minute, we're going to do rapid fire questions inspired by my personal hero, Brene Brown. What is one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
I am grateful for my friends and family who I've been trying to stay more in touch with, especially as I'm entering this entrepreneur journey again. And that includes my friends in communities.
Awesome. We love you too. What is the one business tool or software you can't live without?
I would say my calendar or project management system for getting those things done. I do also have to say HubSpot, though. Right now, HubSpot Community and HubSpot Education is a little more influential than HubSpot the tool.
Got it. Okay, fill in the blank. Documentation is?
Documentation is a secret weapon for growing or scaling your business and for making work less stressful, because you know what to do in your job. You know your team isn't able to do what they need to do in their job.
I love it. So ops people are secret weapons that improve the lives of others, and documentation is one way to do that. Just some closing words. First, a huge thank you, Jen, for your amazing insights and pearls of wisdom. I know it was just scraping the surface, but I hope the audience enjoyed hearing about documentation from you. A huge thank you to everyone who took time out, whether it's your daytime, lunchtime, or evening. Don't take for granted that geeking out on ops with us is an investment you're making. If those of you who aren't in the community but are interested in it, Becca's dropped a link to find out more information on our website, which is operationsnation.com. You can find out more about the community, how to join it, other events that we put on, like our annual conference, this quarterly conversation, our upcoming Aspiring COO course, a myriad of things geeking out on ops. So I'll leave it at that, but just a huge thank you. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us at hello@operationsnation. And thank you again so much, Jen, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.